On the broadcast tonight from Ground Zero here in Lower Manhattan, America remembers 9/11. It's now been 10 years since the darkest day in modern history. Thousands of Americans devoted today to paying tribute to thousands we lost.
Diane Hale McKenzie.
Here in New York.
B. Hall.
At the Pentagon. And in Western Pennsylvania. Tonight, honoring those who were taken from us on this day that will always be with us.
America remembers. This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting from Ground Zero.
Good evening. Just a few hours from now, it will be September 12th, and we'll be beyond this awful day on the calendar for another year. It's a gray evening here in New York City. Of course, this September 11th was different. It's now been a full decade since the morning when hell rained down on Earth from the sky and changed all of our lives forever. So today, in the places where it happened back then, here in New York and in Washington and Pennsylvania, tens of thousands of people gathered to mark the darkest day in modern American history. That field in Pennsylvania has regrown. The Pentagon was fixed a year later. Here in New York, however, it still looks like a bit of a crater, even though now this space at least contains a proper memorial that the families got to visit just today. And that's where we begin our coverage of this day's events with Lester Holt. What a day it was here.
What a day, Brian. 2,983 names were read aloud here at Ground Zero today. That was the combined total of those who died on 9/11 and in the 93 World Trade Center bombing. The reading of the names interrupted 6 times by moments of silence to mark the key moments of destruction on 9/11. For the first time since the attack, the September 11 sun rose in New York City over a permanent memorial to the victims of 9/11, where waterfalls now spill into the footprints of the Twin Towers, mirroring the tears that flowed on this anniversary.
Jill Ann Metzler.
And my dad, Michael Bax.
Former First Lady Laura Bush wept as wives, husbands, parents, and children, some too young to remember their moms or dads, told us who they lost.
And my father, Sebastian Gorky, who I never met because I was in my mom's belly.
Others told us what they lost.
I wish my dad had been there to teach me how to drive, ask a girl out on a date, and see me graduate from high school.
The President and Mrs. Obama began their visit to all 3 attack sites, greeting the family of victims in New York.
God is our refuge and strength.
Later, the president read a biblical passage. Former President Bush quoted another wartime president, Abraham Lincoln, in offering his own consolation.
I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost.
Well, the sun is surely sinking down,
Singer James Taylor performed.
but the moon is slowly rising. Hello, darkness, my old friend.
As did Paul Simon. To the strains of Sound of Silence, families filed into the memorial and saw for the first time the names of their loved ones permanently etched in bronze.
And the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence.
These grounds are the final resting place for many of those who died on 9/11.
Michael Patrick Eichen.
I never got remains of my Michael, and for me, this is the place that I want to honor him.
John A. Katsamatides.
I am really sad by the fact that he's among one of the deceased, obviously, but at the same time, I'm so grateful that his name will be forever preserved, in bronze.
As they have every year, bells tolled at the moments of impact. 9:37 was the moment American Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, killing 184 people.
Amazing grace.
Good morning.
Vice President Biden paid tribute to the Pentagon victims, but also to those who answered the country's call to arms after 9/11.
Many of them were just kids on that bright September morning. But like their grandparents, on December 7th, 1941, they courageously bore the burden that history had placed on their shoulders.
The bells tolled again at 10:03 at the moment United Flight 93 crashed in the Pennsylvania countryside.
My lovely mother,
my beautiful sister,
Cece Ross Lyles.
There were 40 names to read in Shanksville, 40 names now etched into a wall.
Oh, beautiful, spacious skies.
When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them.
The president laid a wreath here before ending his day back in Washington, where he laid another wreath at the Pentagon and spent time with family members. Back in New York, the One World Trade Center tower quickly rises above the ground, a symbol of recovery. Time has healed this landscape, but it does not heal all the wounds of 9/11. The 9/11 memorial opens to the public by reservations tomorrow. And Brian, I talked to a couple of family members who plan to be here tomorrow to greet visitors and to share their stories.
As we said, what a day here today. Lester, thanks. And you saw the president walking around the grounds here after he toured it. He said this memorial was fitting, and he said it, quote, meets the moment. Just yesterday at the White House, I talked with the president about his personal recollections of that day, 9/11, 10 years ago.
We were driving down Lakeshore Drive. I was driving down to go to a meeting in the state building, and heard the first report about a plane going into the towers, and assumed it was a Cessna or somebody who'd had an accident. By the time I parked my car, got into the meeting that I was attending, the reports were starting to come in that this had been a jet liner and that many people had been killed. At that point, we started evacuating the building, and then going to my law office and watching, the towers come down, and the images of people falling from the skies, and the clouds of smoke and dust settling on everyone, and then going home and holding Sasha, rocking her to bed as I was watching the reports of what had happened. And I think that for me, like for most of us, our first reaction was, and continues to be, just heartbreak for the families involved. The other thing that we all remember is how America came together. And so 10 years later, I'd say America came through this thing in a way that was consistent with our character. We've made mistakes. Some things haven't happened as quickly as they needed to. But overall, we took the fight to Al-Qaeda. We preserved our values. We preserved our character.
And yet, you hear that? You think about it differently now. It's just a jet going in a national airport. Here we are surrounded by the machinery of office.
Right.
This is your home base, and yet they consider you at your most exposed.
Right.
It was a game changer, and it remains that we will always listen to that sound differently now.
Well, you know what? There's no doubt that airports are a lot more inconvenient. Pennsylvania Avenue shut down. But what I'm struck by is how much continuity there is. There have been some changes since 9/11. Some innocence perhaps has been lost.
Earlier, we sat down in the cabinet room where I asked the president about the atmosphere of high alert surrounding this 9/11 anniversary. I came from New York this morning. This is the front page of the Post, and there's the unveiling of the memorial, the names, and yet in front of it is a police officer with an automatic weapon. Automatic weapons all over the city this weekend.
Right.
Does that kind of sum up where we are here 10 years later?
Well, there's no doubt that we are safer now than we were 10 years ago. We are in a much stronger position now than we were then. And Al-Qaeda is on the path to defeat. We've taken out huge chunks of their senior leadership, most prominently, obviously, Osama bin Laden. But there are still people out there who would try to hurt Americans, who would try to strike at us, and we have to be constantly vigilant.
We've been told this threat we're under now is specific, credible, and unconfirmed.
Right.
What must you choose not to act on of all the traffic you see, and what do these three words mean when taken together? What are we supposed to do?
Well, I think the most important thing the American people should know is that for months we've been preparing for this 9/11 anniversary. Obviously, each 9/11 we start seeing threat streams coming up. The fact that this is the 10th anniversary means that we're seeing more of these threat streams coming up. One particular threat was specific enough and credible enough that we felt it necessary to inform state and local partners so that they could also be prepared. What we want all Americans to know is, although your government has prepared for it, it's important for everybody to keep their eyes open. We have to honor those who have been fallen, but people should be on the lookout and make sure that if something suspicious is taking place, that you're informing your local law enforcement.
Part of a conversation with the president will be continuing on NBC Nightly News tomorrow night. By the way, there was vivid proof today of this zero-tolerance security policy on this 9/11. F-16 fighter jets shadowed an American Airlines flight from Los Angeles late today as it came in on final approach for a landing at JFK here in New York. Apparently, there were concerns on board that some passengers spent too long in the restroom, so they exercised undue caution, though there was never any real emergency. Once on the ground, federal officials interviewed the passengers involved. There were several assorted other scares at several other airports around the country today, but no verified security threats. Of course, anniversaries like this force us all to relive that morning 10 years ago. Listen to how we first learned something had happened at the Pentagon, which we later learned was the impact of American Airlines Flight 77.
It felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon. And I saw just a moment ago as I looked outside, a number of construction workers who have been working here have taken flight. They're running as far away from the building as they can right now.
From that morning, that was our Pentagon correspondent, Jim Miklaszewski. We didn't know then that two wars would be launched in the name of 9/11, and Jim is with us tonight again from the Pentagon. And Jim, of course, there's news from one of those fronts again today.
That's right, a grim reminder that the war in Afghanistan still goes on. A massive truck bomb exploded at a coalition base just outside of Kabul, wounding 77 NATO forces, most of them American. Fortunately, the injuries were only minor. But it's a grim reminder, too, and the U.S. military and Pentagon officials are well aware that this war has dragged on for 10 years. America's patience, money, and, in fact, is running out. And so the U.S. military has buckled down to meet President Obama's 2014 deadline for the withdrawal of all American troops, which means, according to military officials, they only have 3 more years, Brian, to get it right.
Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon 10 years later. Thanks. And Nightly News will continue from Ground Zero here in New York in just a moment. After this emotional day around the country, we're back here from New York tonight with something of a personal story for us. You're about to hear from a young man named Charlie Green. Charlie was one of our summer interns at Nightly News, and as interns go, he was just like all the others, smart, well-mannered, with a good work ethic. But we later learned he was different in a big way. He was a 9/11 kid. His father, Don, had been killed when United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So we asked Charlie if he wouldn't mind talking about how that staggering loss had changed the way he looks at life.
My father, Don Green, was on United Flight 93. Flying was totally his thing. That's what he did for a living. He was involved in the aviation industry. His father was a pilot. He learned to fly when he was 14 before he had his driver's license. It was his passion. He was the one who could have landed that plane. And I know in the bottom of my heart that if he could have been up in that cockpit, he would have been, and he would have landed that plane safely. We've always said that the sum of each individual passenger's legacy is nowhere near as great as the influence they had on this country as they boarded that flight, became one, and took a tremendous risk. They acted when it's hard to tell if any of us would have done the same thing. When we go to Shanksville, we have to deal with those 40 people who came together and did something so great, and then people wanting to memorialize that action. But we also have to deal with our individual loss. I lost my dad. Throughout the past 10 years, I've tried to think more of these anniversaries as less of remembering a loss and more of remembering a life. When he was my age, he lost his mother, shortly thereafter lost his father. So I've always seen his life as a source of courage for me. If he could do it, if he got to where he was, a man that I looked so much up to, then I could get that too. I've always said that I'd rather have him for the first 10 years of my life, setting up the foundation for the rest of my life, than anything else. And I consider myself so lucky to have had that for the amount of time that I did. You know, one of the things that I like to do is, as these anniversaries come and go, is to think, you know, if he was still here, what would he think of where I am right now? You know, that's been something that's kept me strong, and hopefully he'd be proud of where I am, where my family is, and, you know, I think he would.
Our friend Charlie Green, in his own words about his own family's loss. We also got to see Charlie today taking part in the ceremony from Shanksville, reading some of the names, just one of 3 somber and simultaneous events on this September 11th day. We're back with more tonight right after this. Back here in New York, where tonight we can hear bagpipes in the distance. Absent from this main ceremony here today were many of the 9/11 first responders. There just wasn't enough room for everyone here today. But as NBC's Kevin Tibbles found, they came anyway from around the nation and the world to mark this day and remember those who didn't make it out.
It is a place of pilgrimage, of refuge and camaraderie for first responders from New York and around the world. Today, here for one reason.
To show that people are thinking of them.
O'Hara's Pub stands directly across from Ground Zero. On that awful day, it suffered damage and lost beloved patrons. Today is a day to tell stories and remember.
They don't forget, they never forget, and they feel it important to be here for that.
From Chicago, from California, from London, England, firefighters and police officers stand together as one.
We put fires out, we save lives.
So it is family.
It's a family job.
I'm standing here so that their families know that we care about them and we cared about those guys.
On the street outside a chance meeting, the family of fallen Sergeant Timothy Roy with police officers from Wakeland, Texas, who donated $10,000 in his honor.
Why are you here today? I wanted to see the healing. I wanted to see, I saw this place at its worst. I want to see it at its best.
13-year-old Timothy Jr. today wore his father's cap and badge.
In our time of need and when we were all in sorrow, people gathered together from everywhere and anywhere and came and helped us pretty much repair what was broken.
To honor the fallen, a tribute filled with tradition, heart, and pride. On this day, as it is every day, it is brotherhood, sisterhood, family.
We will honor them forever.
Amen. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News, New York.
And we're back with more right after this. As we said at the top of the broadcast tonight, soon it will be September 12th, and another anniversary will be history. So that is our broadcast for this Sunday night, September 11th, 2011. I'm Brian Williams. Thank you for being here with us, and we hope to see you tomorrow evening. We will leave you tonight with a look back at what this day looked like, this important 10th anniversary for our country.